Today, let's discuss whether you should retake the GMAT or not. The decision of whether and when to retake could be the difference between getting in or not getting in. So let's make sure you have a pro-level understanding of the proper do's and don'ts of retakes. First things first, there is a 16-day waiting period between exams. If you realistically expect to score higher, more on this later and how you can assess this, then you could book right away, like exactly 16 days later. If not, it's better to take your time and invest in generating a great performance. And I'll talk to you about exactly how to make that happen as we go on. Let's start with the best situations to retake, and we'll work our way down to less and less ideal, all the way down to when you shouldn't retake. Probably the most obvious time to retake is when you have time before the deadline and you have bandwidth to study. You're also not 100% happy with your score for any reason, and there's no other better place that you can invest that time and energy that you would be studying. So that's kind of a lot. Let's break that down. So number one, time before the deadline. That could be days, it could be weeks, or it could be months. Any amount of time that could theoretically lead to an increased score works. Bandwidth to study is a reasonable number of hours to see improvement. There are times to retake without any additional study, but those are more rare. Let's say that you have at least 3 hours a week, but ideally 10 hours per week or more. Let's call that like sufficient bandwidth to improve. Let's talk about better places to invest your time and energy. That depends a bit on your specific background, work experience, and your top choice programs. Sometimes the GMAT is a big needle mover in an application decision, but other times it's something else that can help you stand out. So let's talk through some of those elements. If your undergraduate GPA isn't the best, or your GMAT score is more than 30 points below the average, then it's likely that working more on the GMAT is going to help you more than anything else that I'm about to talk you through right now. So that's just kind of the frame. You can think about the admissions decision roughly as 1/3 undergraduate GPA, 1/3 GMAT score, and then 1/3 what we'll call your story, which is what you've done in your career, what you're currently doing in your career, and what you want to do later in your career after your MBA. Now, that's what I'll refer to as your story. Now, different schools are going to prize different things, and there's definitely some variance here, but I'm just going to use that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 breakdown to keep this simple, and it'll be more than enough to help you make good decisions. So again, if your undergraduate GPA is not the best, like it's below average for the school you want to go to, and you can look up that data on most schools' websites, or your GMAT score is more than 30 points below the average, within 30 points of the average, I think is pretty acceptable. Talk about that more later. Then in those two cases, you're more than 30 points away with GMAT, GPA isn't so great. It's very likely that working on the GMAT is going to help you get in with a greater degree of certainty than anything I'm about to talk you through. But if your undergraduate GPA is really strong and your GMAT score is close to the average or maybe even above average, here are a few things that might help you. And this could be things that are more worth your time to invest in versus GMAT. So first, you could get recognized or promoted at work. So you want to ask yourself, how realistic is that? Business schools care if you've shown recent progress toward your goals. Telling them you've made progress in your essay definitely helps, but it's always way more powerful if someone in your organization gives you tangible recognition. In general, showing is more powerful than telling, and I think most of us would probably agree with that. So that's step one. If you can get recognized or promoted at work and your GPA is already really strong and your GMAT is close to the average or above the average, then it's probably a situation where you want to focus more of your energy on getting recognized or promoted at work and potentially not retake. The next thing to consider is whether you can engage in activities outside of work that align with your values and the school's values that are shared. Where's the value overlap between your personal values and the school's values? If you can engage in activities that demonstrate that, that's going to be really powerful. Sometimes this specific area is more controllable than getting recognized at your job. So that's part of the reason I'm bringing it up. And it's still a way of showing rather than telling. So if it's clear that you put your time into activities that demonstrate alignment between your values and the program's values, that's going to be a lot more powerful than simply stating that your values align with the program in your essays and in your interviews. If you can demonstrate that, that's going to be a lot more powerful. The last piece might be obvious, but it's worth mentioning anyway. And you want to ask yourself whether you could do a better job writing your essays and preparing yourself for the interviews. The quality of your essays and interviews definitely make a difference. And most of you are already going to do a good job here. So that's why I brought up the above items first. But if your GPA and GMAT are strong and your work trajectory and commitments outside of work tell a great story about you, then usually the next best thing would be improving your essays and your interview skills with some professional help or just increased effort. And that's probably going to be the best use of time and energy. So when I say the best time to retake is when you have time before the deadline, you have bandwidth to study, you're not 100% happy with your GMAT score, and there's no other better place that you can invest time, meaning it's unlikely you're going to get recognized at work. You can't really demonstrate more value alignment through your activities, and your essays and interviews are already top-notch or the best that you think you're going to do. That's an ideal time to retake. There's no better place you can put your energy, if that makes sense. Now, if the recognized or promoted at work is in a good spot, engaging in activities outside of work is in a good spot, essays and interviews are in a good spot, or you have plenty of bandwidth to expand on those later, and you have time and energy to study, then retaking the GMAT makes a ton of sense. So let me try to put some numbers to this. And these are just going to be rough numbers, but I think it'll help you make a good decision. So if you are 30 points below the school's average, let's say, give or take, then it's probably not a huge deal. Your GMAT score is probably not a major factor in the admissions decision. And raising your score 30 points to hit the average, you're probably looking at like maybe a 10 to 20% odds of success improvement over having the lower score. And I think putting that maybe 10 to 20% odds of improvement, that can help you weigh that retake decision against what I was just talking to you about. Because all those other areas that I just talked about improving, let's just call that about a 20% improvement that all of those could give you. So that's why I was saying, like, if you're closer than 30 points or you're hitting the average or you're above average, then you probably won't get like a 20% boost in probability of admission with a higher GMAT score. You might get like a 2% or 5% boost. It's not nothing. But if you can get a 20% boost in odds of success by getting recognized at work, then I think most of us would agree that's probably the better place to spend your energy. Okay, so I'm going to, again, these are really rough numbers, but it's close enough that it'll help you make a good decision about whether you should retake or whether you should invest your time and energy elsewhere. So back to the points. If you are 30 points below the school's average, then retaking the GMAT would probably make sense if those other areas I just talked you through are in a good spot. If you're 10 points below the school's average and those other things are not in a good spot, you should probably double down on those and either push the retake out or just avoid retaking it all. Okay. Now, if you're 50 points below the school's average, that's definitely a negative. It's not an automatic rejection by any means. Plenty of people get in within that range. But improving your GMAT score is probably going to improve your odds by like 50%. Like it's a significant gain in likelihood of success if you're 50 points below the average and you can improve that score. So that in that situation, retaking the GMAT, even if you could get recognized at work, it's probably a better idea to double down on the GMAT in that situation. And hopefully these numbers I'm giving you make sense to you. But if they don't, just reach out anytime and I'll give you our contact in just a moment. Okay. So if you're 70 points below the school's average in terms of GMAT score, that is a tough sell, but it is still possible. Having said that, retaking and improving your score could be like an 80% boost in odds of success of getting admitted. Now, of course, this depends on how much you can increase the score, and it depends on the strength of the other parts of your application. But all else being equal, these are some rough numbers. So if you're 70 points below the average and you think you can move the score 20 points higher, that's probably going to help a lot. If you think you can move it 70 points or 100 points higher, That's going to be huge. That's when you're improving your odds of success by like 70, 80%, let's call it. Okay. So a good calculation there is multiply zero point 0.8, which is the increased likelihood of success, times your expected post MBA earnings increase, and that'll give you a nice quote unquote expected value of the time and energy investment there. So it's usually very worth it. Now, 100 points below the average is a major, major risk. And depending on where you're applying, you might not even get your application read within that range. And this is part of why we're bringing this material to you, because the GMAT really, really matters. For folks who want to go to business school, it is a big deal. Still possible that you would get in 100 points away from the average. People definitely do every single year. But now you're getting into the place where it's like less than 10% odds of success unless you have something really, really amazing in the rest of your application. Again, still possible you can get in. I don't want to speak in absolutes here. These are just rough numbers based on quite a bit of data, but I'm sure there's other people out there who have other numbers, and we could probably massage these a little bit. But the reason that I'm breaking them down in simple terms is to help you make a good decision about whether you should retake or not. So these numbers are close enough that it'll help you make the right call. Okay. So let's contrast those numbers with the above items again. So increasing your GPA is probably not going to happen unless you've got some technology that I don't know about. That's probably set in stone at this point in your career. And I've talked about that many times in the past. But there are some things that I see admissions consultants recommend, like taking a university extension class or taking like a basic MBA math class and trying to get a good grade in that. And that, in a way, is kind of like massaging the GPA a little bit. It kind of more just contextualizes the GPA. It's almost like in a negotiation, if you're not going to change your price, but maybe you can sweeten the deal by including something else. You know, it doesn't really change your GPA, but it could help. So something like that, it can be a great investment of time and energy. Getting promoted at work, like we talked about, increasing your investment in positive activities outside of work that demonstrate values alignment. Broadly speaking, all of those things, they probably increase your odds of admission, maybe 20%. Again, this is going to be very person specific. You can always reach out to professional admissions consultants, and most of them will offer a free consultation. You can A/B test this or fact check me with them just based on your specific situation, your resume, your background, the schools you want to go to. But again, just talking about majorly broad category of schools in general, like top 50, and then majorly broad category of people. These are people in banking, people in marketing, people in education. I mean, there's a really diverse group of people who apply to business school and a really diverse group of schools. So these are, again, just really rough numbers. I'm going to try not to say that again because I probably said that 100 times. I'm sorry if it's annoying. I just want to give you accurate, useful advice. That's my intention. So again, tremendous amount of variance, but 20% odds of success improvement is pretty good. Again, even if you multiply your post MBA increased earnings by 0.2, that's a pretty strong expected value proposition for most of us if it comes to taking an MBA math course or something like that. So you just want to weigh the point differential from how far you are from the average against these other things and put those numbers to it. Within 30 points, retaking and increasing up to the average, maybe 10 to 20% increased odds of admission. 50 points off, maybe 50% increase in odds of admission. 70 to 100 points off, maybe 80% odds increased of admission if you can hit the average. So retaking the GMAT probably makes a lot more sense than trying to take a post MBA, an MBA math course, pre-MBA math course. But if you're 10 points away from the average and you're like, should I retake or should I take this math course? Math course is probably going to be more helpful on average. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, if you don't want to book a call with these admissions professionals for any reason at all, or you've already exhausted your free consultations with these people and you've worn out, you're welcome. What I've just presented should be more than enough to help you make the appropriate decision. But if you're really unsure and you want some advice, you can also reach out to us anytime. You can reach us at the GMAT Strategy on current social channels, or you can email us if you prefer. Our email address is contact@thegmatstrategy.com, CONTACT at thegmatstrategy.com. And we're always happy to help. So just to wrap up and reiterate, the best time to retake the GMAT is when you have time to study and the other parts of your application are already in a really good place. So if you're recently promoted or recognized at work, you've got a strong story, you're doing stuff outside of work that shows great values alignment with the program, and you've got some bandwidth, probably worth retaking. If you're close to the average and those other things are not in such a good place, might want to invest in those instead. So let's move through a couple more scenarios that I get asked about all the time. And let's make sure you're crystal clear on this. So again, trying to give you that pro level understanding. One of the next best times to retake the exam is if you've already taken the test and received a score that you're actually happy with, but there's no other better place you can invest your time based on the other factors that we just discussed. So maybe you got burnt out with the exam and decided to focus on the other aspects of the application, but maybe those ended up going well or like more quickly than expected. And all of a sudden you have this additional bandwidth, even though you've hit the average or beat the average at your target school. You may have a bit more time and bandwidth to study, and that's a great time to retake because at that point, that's probably the thing that's going to help you the most. This option is definitely more of a personal choice, though, and probably isn't essential in most cases. If you're already hitting the average or above average and all those other things are in a good spot, you've got a really, really strong case on your hands and like high degree of likelihood that you're going to get in. But if you want that extra edge, if you want to increase your odds of success by maybe 2 to 8%, then this is probably the most controllable way to do that. It's very much in your control whether you improve your GMAT score or not. So if you're not happy with your retake score, the good news there is you don't need to send it. You can choose which attempts the schools see. So in a way, it's kind of like a low risk way to increase your odds of success because there's very little downside to it, if that makes sense. Now, if you've already invested a ton of time and energy into the process and you feel confident and retaking the exam is going to take time away from other pursuits, then that's a little bit more of a complicated situation. And again, this situation I'm talking about is more of a personal choice. And I think the question is really like how much you value putting your best foot forward, and how meaningful the MBA is to you at this point in your career. Also, if you're applying to like top 3 schools, every percentage point of improvement helps. And some of you are just that type of person who you just are not going to feel good about it unless you know you put your best foot forward. And I'll have more to say about that later. But that's why I said it's more of a personal choice than a necessity. So this isn't crucial, but it can be a really good time to retake. And I do get asked about it quite a bit. So figured you might want to know that it might help you out. Another great situation to retake is when you scored way below your practice exam results. This is becoming like a little bit more obvious of a time to retake. So I'm going from these kind of like best case scenarios or really good case scenarios down through the like, okay, this is obviously a less desirable position to be in than what I was just talking about. Okay. But if your practice exam scores are high, but then when you take the official exam, your score is quite low relative to those, this is a great time to retake the exam. And again, this one might be obvious, but I still get asked about it a lot. So if you've reached a goal score level score, for example, on a practice exam, just to choose kind of an extreme example, and then during that practice exam, you didn't pause or cheat or like check your notes or something like that, and you hit a score that you'd be happy with, then you have proven to yourself that you have the capability to score that high. It's worth noting that practice exams, if you're using the ones from MBA.com, which I highly recommend, cannot recommend that enough, then those exams use real retired GMAT questions and the real scoring algorithm. So that in many ways is like a real GMAT score, quote unquote, real GMAT score. Now, there might be some gaps that got exposed on test day, such as like increased anxiety or content knowledge or timing deficiencies, or maybe just mistakes you weren't aware of or prepared for on your practice exams. That can be a tough situation. And we're all human. It's super tough to be perfect 100% of the time. So scoring lower on test day happens. And that can be a really, really good opportunity to learn some valuable lessons about yourself and about performance in general. So I think it's good to see it as an opportunity. There's really no way around the negative emotions that are going to come from seeing a score go down on an official exam, especially if you were feeling like really confident based on your practice exam scores. But again, it happens. And it's just a good time to reframe that some of those negative thoughts that can arise from the negative feelings. Like I think the negative feelings are totally natural, and you can think however you want to think. But I would recommend doing some reframing and just saying like, okay, this sucks. Obviously, I don't want to feel that way. Obviously, that was not the outcome I wanted. But given that I'm in this situation, where's the opportunity here? How can I use this to grow? How can I use this to get better? It's a great time to give yourself another chance to reach the full potential that you've demonstrated that you are at least capable of hitting some of the time. Now, in this situation, we should talk about a few more details. I don't recommend just signing up right away in this kind of situation. You'll instead want to do a big audit of your skill set, any gaps that were obviously exposed on test day. Sometimes it's not obvious, but sometimes it is. And you want to generate the best theory that you can based on what happened during the real test. Most of the time, if you're super honest with yourself, you'll know the top 1 to 3 things that didn't go well. And I would definitely recommend trusting your judgment there. Now, the much worse scenario, I think, is times when it's a total shock and you're not at all sure what happened on test day. I think that's a little bit scarier, if not a lot scarier, versus like, oh man, yeah, I can totally pinpoint these 3 things that went wrong. Like if you're like, I did everything flawlessly and I had no problems, and all of a sudden my score is like 50 or 100 points lower, that's definitely really, really rough. And that's when the score report that gets sent to you after the fact can be super, super handy. If you're not sure how to interpret that score report data, just touch base with us and we're happy to help. Again, at the GMAT strategy on current social channels anytime. Email us, contact at the GMAT strategy, and we can help you break that down. But a lot of you are professional data analyzers, so you should be able to pull a lot of good inferences from that. If you want a professional opinion, let us know. Now, before you retake, again, you'll want to identify to the best of your abilities what went wrong, and then you're going to want to validate your theory about what went wrong and how to best fix it with some practice exams. It's a delicate situation when you've seen the score go down on test day, even though your practice exams were really good. And so I think there's a tendency to want to rush just because of that feeling of like, ugh, I want to get this done. I thought I was going to be done. And that's the most human thing to feel. It's totally natural. Most of us would feel that way. Almost anybody would feel that way. So you don't have to worry about feeling bad about it. That makes sense. But it's dangerous to just kind of be like, oh, let me just give it another shot real quick. You know, maybe my score will bounce back up to my practice exams, kind of like reversion to the mean. And obviously that's possible. Like that could definitely happen. I don't want to discourage you. But it's a risky situation because if you go in and take the official exam again and the score is bad again, now you're probably feeling so bad that you're at risk at like giving up. And giving up on your dreams is a major, 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 major thing. So we want to protect against that as much as we possibly can. And it can be delicate when you're facing this kind of adversity. So this is why I'm trying to be as clear and heavy-handed, but also like supportive as I can with this advice. So what I'd recommend is doing your best to hit your goal score on 2 consecutive practice tests. That's a really good sign that you're ready for a retake. If you want more detailed advice about when you're truly quote unquote ready to reach a peak score on the official exam, we have a whole episode dedicated to that. It's called When Am I Ready to Take the Official GMAT? That might be a little bit more than you need in this situation, but if you're really hurting and you're like, yeah, I want like all the information right now, I have definitely been there, and that's why I made that episode for you. So that'll be linked below this content and also searchable in the feed. Now, if you have ideas about what might have gone wrong, or you've interpreted the score report and you're not really sure how to structure a study plan to improve those things, even though you've identified the problem areas, and you need some advice about how to structure that study plan specifically for a retake, then I would recommend 2 episodes. The first one is called How to Structure Your GMAT Focused Study Time. That'll be linked below. And also How to Restart Your Studies After a Break, which will also link below. And those both should really, really help a lot. So that's the situation where your practice exams were a lot better than your official exam. It hurts real, real bad, but it is a resolvable situation. If you put your mind to it, you can make it happen. Plenty of people have figured it out, even if it was really, really tough. A often related situation to the one we were just describing is extenuating circumstances, such as like bad sleep the night before an official test, eating some bad food. I've had clients get food poisoning before their official exam. Ugh, can you imagine? Just stress, exam-related stress, work-related stress, personal-related stress the night before an exam or the week before an exam. Like that stuff can happen. And it's low odds that that kind of thing is going to happen. Let's be real. But you probably just won't perform your best if after bad sleep, getting sick, being stressed out. I mean, maybe you're that person who rises to the occasion, but it's unusual. Let's just put it that way. So that stuff can happen despite our best efforts. Sometimes we are executing like perfectly, flawlessly on our side, and it still just happens. It could just be bad luck, and it is super unfortunate. But it's also one of the most obvious times to retake the exam. So let's talk about that. Um, it's often an extension of my previous point, actually, about scoring below your practice exams, but not always. Sometimes you have a tough situation like bad sleep the night before, and you end up performing in line or slightly higher than practice exams, but you are still not happy with your score. Um, and it's not guaranteed, but it's extremely likely that retaking with a better sleep situation will allow you to get a higher score. So, um, while this is often a reason that people underperform on test day, scoring below your practice exams isn't the only signal that your sleep routine can use some work. Maybe obvious, but probably worth pointing out. So, it's a good reminder to do your best to control what you can control, such as good sleep, diet, and exercise routines, practicing your night before routine and your test day routines on your practice exams, that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff that maybe seems like going above and beyond just knowing the material. But those things often affect our performance and they're really worth paying attention to because if you think about it, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get a peak level performance out of your body, mind, psychology, emotional whole situation. And there's a lot that goes into to being able to produce that on command, to being able to produce that kind of peak performance at will. But it is doable. So, if you want help establishing a good night before routine for your practice exams to set you up for success, I recommend the episode titled Test Day. And there's actually two versions of that episode. There's an old one that has some details about the old version of the GMAT. If you didn't know there was a new version of the GMAT in 2024, then definitely check out the episode from a few weeks back called What Everyone Should Know About the GMAT in 2025. But I did an old episode where I went like super in depth on all the things you can do to prep yourself for a good routine night before and morning of. But I do want to give the caveat that some of the details of the exam and the check-in process in that particular old episode, I think it's from 2019 or 2020, are dated. And some of those details will have changed. So, good news is I have an updated episode called GMAT Focus Test Day Experience. And that doesn't go as in depth with the night before and morning of routines, but it does have up to today details of how the check-in process works and how the test goes and all that kind of stuff that's been changed for the new exam last year. So sorry if you end up needing to go to both of those episodes to get the clarity that you want, but I think you will find it more than worth it if you want some advice on that. If you're like, dude, are you seriously about to recommend I listen to a podcast to get my night before test day routine in place? And you're like, that is way past the limit. I didn't even know that people thought about that thing. That's totally fine. You don't have to do any of this. I'm just giving you options. So, just short version of this. Think about the kinds of activities that will set you up for success before an event like this, like a big time event in your life. Some people get way too neurotic about that, and it ends up being counterproductive. So if you're like, let me just chill, and it's not that big a deal, that's totally fine, totally acceptable. But if you're like, I want the 10 bullet points that are going to help me the most, you have the tools to make that happen now. So just some examples. Some people just like to purely relax, not really do much. Other people like a light review session and then maybe like doing something fun. But in general, I recommend not studying super hard the night before your exam. Ending your study session earlier than usual and doing something fun is usually the right move, puts you in a good state of mind, helps you sleep a little bit better. And it's totally fine to socialize if that's your thing. And if that puts you at ease, I think a lot of people feel like, oh, I got to kind of like be in my zone. That's fine. If you're more that like be in your own zone kind of person, that's what I did the night before my exams, taking the official GMAT multiple times now. Um, but some people like to go out, have a glass of wine, whatever. It's totally fine to indulge in the things that you enjoy. It's really tough to be stressed out about an exam if you're having a good time. Let's put it that way. Now, perhaps obviously, don't overindulge. You're not celebrating early here, unless you're at your best in that situation, in which case, much respect. But I personally am not, and I don't think I've worked with very many clients over the years who are at their best after a night of hardcore celebrating. But to each their own. Um, so yeah, for the day of routine, very, very similar advice. Just focus on the basics. Getting up early enough that you're not groggy when you're starting the exam, getting any caffeine in. If you're a caffeine consumer, about an hour before you begin the test is good. Usually eating a meal that will give you sustained energy is a good idea. Just basic things are really helpful. And then again, like I said, if you want like a lot more advice about that, that's there for you in those other episodes. Again, the key with these routines is to experiment with them on practice tests. So, like if you're thinking about going out with your buddies and having a glass of wine the night before the official exam, ideally you do that before your practice test as well to see how it feels so that there's no surprises on test day, if that makes sense. Ideally, you're not tweaking your routines the night before or the day of your actual exam. It's fine if it's necessary or you got a little behind with this and like you're listening to this episode in your exams in 3 days, that's fine. But ideally, you've experimented far in advance and the test day itself is going to be very familiar. And if you did not do that before your official exam and you're considering a retake, then that is stuff to definitely put time and energy into for the retake. It'll probably really help out. Having said all that, even if you have optimized your routine perfectly, sometimes bad things just happen at bad times. This is life. And if something like that happens, it's a good time to remind yourself that conditions are rarely perfect and that it's great to practice being the type of person who can handle adversity well. Our adversity tolerance is probably going to be a major factor in our success. This is true most of the time. So give yourself some time to research ways you can overcome any drawbacks that you experienced on test day. If you didn't sleep well, research some ways you can improve your sleep. If you were stressed, research some ways you can improve your ability to handle that kind of stress. This is a really good time actually to use generative AI. In my experience, you can just describe the situation to the bot and ask for some advice. Keep asking until you get some action items that you're open to trying out. Then try them out systematically, like I said, on practice tests. Record your observations in a super simple way. It could be just like a note on your phone or however you like to track data. And keep going until you're confident that it's not going to be an issue next time you take the test. Or at least confident enough that you'll have improved with that part of performing well the next time you take the exam. Probably goes without saying, but handling adversity is by definition not easy. That means it might not feel good to confront and deal with those things, especially things like anxiety or like just mishandling the night before or day of, or like things that we wish were not true of us that are true of us. Like that makes sense. Most people are not going to feel good about that stuff. That's totally acceptable. You've probably handled a lot of things that didn't feel good as a person, and yet here you are reaching for the next level in your career. And it's unlikely any of those things that you dealt with before that felt bad and that were hard have the kind of upside that you have in this situation. I might be wrong about that. But when I felt bad when my like high school relationship ended, like my first love, that felt super, super, super bad. But that did not have the upside that getting a top tier MBA would have had for me. And I got through that. So yeah, maybe there were some tough things for me to deal with here. But it's probably worth it. Probably worth it. That's all I'm saying. And the truth is, you can probably handle it. Maybe there's something you got going on that I don't know about, but I bet that if you really put your mind to it, you can make it happen. So just in case you want some help becoming a better performer when you are not feeling good, check out our series on how to study smarter, harder, and longer. That's also going to be linked below. It's a 3-part series. And yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart, but it should do the trick if you want some help with that. So just worth repeating that the idea in these situations is to retake, but also to re-optimize. It's not just to like have another shot at the test. You want to have a better shot at the test, if that makes sense. So do your best to make legitimate changes, test them out on practice exams, and then schedule your retake when you're confident that you've done your best to overcome the obstacle. Remember that if at first you do not succeed, try again. Confronting obstacles that we didn't anticipate or that are part of our environment can be a major bummer, but basically all of these obstacles are overcomable. Just summarizing everything I just said with enough resourcefulness and initiative, two of the most important qualities that we can have as people who want to be successful. Now, a few other good times to retake. Number one is you simply have not reached your goal yet. And I already talked about the rational analysis of how to gauge the expected value of a higher score against other areas of the application that you can improve. But There is a case to be made for the emotional and personal side of simply not having accomplished what you set out to do. If you have the energy and you know you're capable of more, that's worth something. Motivation can be rare. So if you have it, I think it is worth capitalizing on. I think the strongest argument for this type of retake situation is from John Wooden, who is one of the winningest coaches in sports history. And he defined success as the satisfaction in knowing that you did the absolute best you could with the resources you had. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. His definition is much, much better than the one I just gave you, but it's close enough. And if you're thinking about doing this and you're like, you know what? I just know I can do better. Then there is a case to be made for that. You're probably going to face rejection at some point in this process. Most people do not get into every single program that they apply to. There's a lot of peace of mind that can come with knowing that you presented the absolute best application that you were personally capable of. Like if you're going to face rejection, I think there's a lot of peace of mind in just knowing like that was as good as that was going to get. So if I didn't get in, it wasn't because of lack of effort or things that I could control on my side. Again, I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm just saying if you think like this, then I think this is actually a really good reason to retake the exam. Now, you know, if you're the type of person who has that mindset and if what I'm talking about resonates with you. And if you're not, that's no problem there. But I just want to at least briefly touch on that situation because I really don't see it discussed very often. And yeah, the majority of people probably don't think like that and are just looking for that rational analysis I gave at the top of the episode of like, just give me the numbers, which is totally fine. But it is also totally fine if you're the kind of person who finds it worth it to continue for the sake of seeing what you're capable of. I do think there is a really, really strong argument to be made there. For example, maybe your score is acceptable for admission, but you're thinking like, well, what could an extra 30 points get me? Well, maybe it could get you 30K or 50K or 120K in scholarships. Maybe it's just going to help you sleep better. Each of us tends to be motivated by different things, and there's no guarantee that a higher score is going to get you scholarship money, but it does happen all the time, and the odds are good. The odds are good. If you have a higher score, you have a higher chance of getting that aid. If you can raise a school's average GMAT score, that really helps your case. Like if your score is above the average, it makes it a lot easier for them to let you in. Now, simply getting the best GMAT score you can is not always enough to get you into every school. That's probably obvious. The application process is a bit of a black box. You don't always get feedback. So definitely consider the other areas that you can improve, like I mentioned. But again, don't be afraid to go all in simply because you're excited to go all in. It's a perfectly acceptable reason to retake. Another excellent reason to retake is you have a good idea of what went wrong and how to fix it. So this is kind of related to something we discussed before, so I'm going to move quickly through this, but I do want to add a couple things. First, a consistent process yields consistent results. If you had trouble executing for any reason, this is a great time to retake because it's not that complicated to become a better executor, especially if you're already clear on what you should be doing. Now, if you need help improving your execution, I recommend our episodes on discipline and how to be more consistent. The how to be more consistent one is called how to score high consistently on GMAT Focus, I think is what that's called. But those are both linked below also. Highly recommend if you want to become a better executor. The most common reasons that you may not have scored as well as you wanted to are timing, like time management, and missing questions you know how to do, both of which are very controllable. But like pretty much all of my recommendations here, you'll want to invest time in those to measurably improve them before retake. So I just wanted to add that on as kind of like a footnote to what I was talking about before about underperforming. But let's just stick with the timing thing. If you want help improving your timing, our episode on speed should really help. I think it's called how to be faster at GMAT focus questions. It'll be linked below. If you want help stopping missing questions you know how to do, which is a major, major problem for virtually all of us, then the How to Structure Your Study Time podcast will really, really help. I talked about that one earlier. That'll be linked below as well. And if you need to improve your content knowledge or your approach to learning content, then I can definitely recommend our episodes on GMAT Quant, GMAT Verbal, and GMAT Data Insights. Those will be linked below as well. If you don't need help with any of that stuff, that's cool. That's why I'm linking out to those and not just like going along on them because each one of those is probably multiple episodes worth of stuff. So it's there for you if you want it. But if there's a clear path to improvement, this is often a great time to retake because all you have to do is execute on the path. The path itself is already clear, which is often more than half the battle. So, final thought on this, a lot of people just do more of what has already not worked for them, like just more reps on multi-source reasoning, even though they haven't performed well on multi-source reasoning in the past. And that, I guess, sometimes works, but it's a low percentage chance that it's going to work. Often you'll benefit from some kind of strategic shift. And that's actually a good time to use the web to your advantage or consider investing in a new program if you need to. If you're not seeing results with your current system and you're not sure how to make a good decision about how to switch providers, we've got an episode on that also. It's called How to Switch GMAT Providers, and it'll help a lot with that. And again, you can also reach out to us if you want some personal advice there. It's a tough situation. If you made a wrong bet with your first provider, it sucks, but I did it twice and it hurt really, really bad, which is part of the reason I'm making this material for you because I don't want you to suffer like I did. But it happens despite your best efforts. And yeah, it just might have been a rational bet, but maybe it's just not a fit. And the worst thing you can do is keep investing in something that you know is not going to work instead of just switching it up. So that's that. That's you know how to you know what you need to execute on, but you struggled to execute on it on test day, and you just need to become a better executor. That's a great time to retake the exam. Becoming a better executor, super, super controllable thing. Not always easy, but very doable. People do it all the time. Another great situation to retake. You've got strong data showing consistent improvement in your practice exams. I do want to say like some variance in the practice exams is normal, like a 20-point swing up or down. But if you plot the trend on a graph and it's going up and to the right, that strongly suggests that doing more of what you were already doing will work. So that's a good time to retake, even if your score was strong on test day. Like you're just riding the trend line in that situation. Very, very good opportunity to retake the exam. I've already detailed how you can weigh this investment against others. So we'll leave that one as it is. But basically, if what you're doing is working and you have more time to do it, it's very likely that retaking will result in a higher score. And that's usually a good idea if you weigh it against those other aspects of the application that can help out. Okay, quick note about non-MBA commitments in the decision to retake. If you can continue to study without disrupting your other commitments too much, that's a great time to retake the exam. Might be obvious once again, but if the opposite is true and you're going to be missing out on key personal and professional commitments in order to study, that makes the decision a little bit simpler. You should probably prioritize those other things and not study for retaking the GMAT, especially if those things are more important to you than an MBA. And if you've made a list of priorities and goals, which I definitely recommend, then this is a good time to use it. And if you're not sure how to make a list like that, just check out part 3 of the How to Study Smarter, Harder, and Longer series. And that'll walk you through how to make those kinds of lists of priorities and goals. But this kind of situation where you're dealing with other commitments and you're trying to weigh that against retaking the exam is a cost-benefit analysis at the end of the day. You can make a model if you want. You can ask Gen AI for advice, or you can ask Gen AI to make a model for you, or you can consult with a mentor, which I would strongly recommend if it's more like personal considerations, like stuff that's not going to fit into an Excel spreadsheet. And ideally, it's a mentor who's seen the kind of success that you want to see. So if you have access to those kinds of people, it's a great time to use those relationships and get a little bit of advice about balancing personal and MBA. If you don't have access to those people, you can ask a Gen AI to simulate successful people. And it's probably not the best thing. Best thing would be being able to call them on the phone or have a Zoom or something. But next best thing sometimes is just Gen AI simulation. And it's kind of crazy that that technology exists now, so we might as well use it. And it's not going to be perfect, but it can sometimes get your wheels turning and it can help you make a better decision in my experience. So yeah, it's a good situation to get an outside perspective on, is what I'm trying to say. And sometimes we're talking to our friends about it or we're talking to our family about it, but they're sometimes giving us advice and they're not the most informed about what we want to do and the type of person we are. And if that's not true, great, definitely lean into that advice. But if you're like, I don't know if I can really, obviously this person loves and cares about me. It's not about that, but I just don't know if they have the technical understanding of the process to help me out here, then reaching out to a mentor, great idea. Sometimes personal commitments are the priority, and it's not always obvious when to prioritize those. But we'll usually get the best advice from people who have what we want. So that's what I recommend if you're unsure. If you're really stuck, you're really in a bind, we're happy to lend a hand with that too. But yeah, most of you are not trying to become us. But if you are, then let us know and we're happy to advise. Final situation where it can make sense to retake the exam that a lot of people aren't aware of, but I do want to bring to your attention because I think it's valuable, is retaking the exam after the deadline, after the application deadline. Perhaps obviously it is not recommended to plan to take the exam after the deadline. But because some schools won't even consider scores that are submitted after the deadline. So you want to do some diligence on this. Having said that, some schools accept and even welcome updates after the deadline, as long as it's before they've made their final decision. So it can be worth doing a little bit of research. I would definitely look at the school's website. I would definitely call the schools if you're unsure. Just call the admissions office and see if they have an official policy about sending updated scores. They'll usually be pretty forthright with you about that. So quick example, let's say you submitted with a score that was like below or maybe even far below the average, but you do really need to get in this round for whatever reason. This is a great time to consider a retake of the exam to get ahead of a waitlist situation. Obviously, it's better if you can get the score in advance of the deadline, but all kinds of things can come up that prevent that from happening. So sometimes we have to deal with the situation that isn't ideal. And we talked about adversity tolerance earlier. This is a good time to deploy some of that. So in this kind of situation, you want to balance getting the score submitted as soon as possible with getting a better score. Can be a little bit of a tension here. In this case, all the advice that I've given in the episode so far should really apply in terms of what I've told you to do the analysis of what went wrong and then come up with some ways to fix that. But if you're not sure how to handle your situation specifically, just message us and we're happy to help. But I think a lot of people assume that if they've missed the deadline, then they just have like no hope. But even though that is true in some cases, hopefully now you know it's not true 100% of the time. So it can be a good time to retake the exam, even though it's a little unexpected and yeah, definitely not ideal, but it's way better than nothing if the school will accept an update. If you are going to retake after the deadline and send updates, again, all the advice about how to analyze and improve and validate with practice exams that I've given already applies. So please don't just randomly retake. Create a structured plan based on your strengths and weaknesses, focus on great execution, validate with practice exams, and then retake. You can squeeze all that into a short time frame. It's going to be intense, but it's doable, and it's a lot better than like, well, let me just see how this goes. Now, we'll talk about the let me see how this goes situation in a sec, but that's that. That's retaking after the deadline. And in my opinion, that covers almost every situation in which you'd want to retake the exam. And hopefully that wasn't too thorough for you, but I do get asked about it a lot, and there is a lot of nuance. So I wanted to do my best to try to cover that for you. So hopefully that helped. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about when maybe you shouldn't retake the exam. Number one situation, if your official score is above your practice tests and you're not willing to commit to studying anymore, probably not a good use of time and energy to retake the exam. I think this one is kind of obvious, but again, it's worth touching on because in this situation, you're pretty much just like gambling. And it's fine to just hope that things will go well. There's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with that. It's just a personal choice. It's completely up to you how to manage that kind of situation, but it's unlikely to be a good use of time and energy versus investing in some of the other areas that I outlined above. It's usually just a much better idea to work on your essays or maybe try to get recognized at your job. Having said that, if everything that we talked about there is awesome and you've got plenty of time to do all of the above and also just randomly retake to see what happens and you're into that, totally cool. But it wouldn't be my strongest recommendation. Let's put it that way. If you do decide to do it, I definitely wish you good luck and I hope it turns out great. Another situation where a retake might be a bad idea is if you haven't studied much or at all. I in some ways touched on this already, but I do want to bring something else up that I didn't touch on before because this is even less advisable than the previous situation of like, hey, let's just, YOLO, see how it goes. Because in this kind of situation where you haven't studied much and you're thinking about retaking, you're burning an attempt and you can only take the exam 5 times in a calendar year. So at least in the previous situation that I was describing, you've already got a score that you're somewhat happy with and or like above what you're seeing on practice exams. And if you're retaking without that data and without investing time and energy, it's just much more likely that it's going to go poorly versus go well. Like it's like less than 50% odds that you're going to see a score increase. And I'm not saying that to discourage you at all. It's totally possible you'll score higher. But I just want to help you make good decisions that you're not going to regret down the line. And burning an attempt and winding up like in the next attempt with like, oh shoot, this is the last time I can take it for another 6 months. That's stress that I think you'd just rather not have for most of us. The best time to take a test is when you've addressed your known issues, like I've mentioned many, many times, made measurable improvements, like practice exam data is there, and you're going to be set up for success physically, like sleep, diet, exercise routines, etc. So just reiterating that if you haven't improved those things, aka your skills, it's unlikely that you've improved your score. Just trying to be as real with you as possible, trying to be like a good friend, and be supportive and be real. So in this case, again, just address the known opportunities to the best of your abilities, like I talked about so much already. Retake the exam after you've seen validation instead of just kind of burning an attempt, hoping for the best, if that makes sense. That's my advice. Another time to avoid a retake is when your practice test scores are not moving despite investing a lot of study time and energy. This is definitely not a desirable situation to be in, but it happens frequently. It happened to me multiple times. Terrible situations, all of them. And in general, none of us are the type of people who like to push deadlines, but it might not be an effort problem. And it usually is not, by the way. It's usually not a problem with your effort. Sometimes you just made the wrong bet with your planner provider. I talked about that earlier. Doesn't mean anybody's a bad person, just means it's not a fit. If you need to switch, again, we got that episode there for you, how to switch GMAT providers. Also, you can message us if you're not sure how to make that call. But for the sake of clarity, retaking an exam when your approach clearly is not working is not advised for a lot of the reasons I brought up earlier in the episode. Burning attempt, likely to feel even worse after the second time, much more likely to give up on your dreams. And we really don't want that happening. You have a lot to offer the business leadership community, despite what you might be thinking about yourself at this point in time. And I personally really want to see you actualize that potential. I think it is going to make a massive, massive positive difference. And I can show you all kinds of facts and figures about even just the small amount of good that we've done with the TGS project, helping people get into business school and like the major, awesome, positive impact that these people are having. They're just regular people just trying to do their best. And that is, I guess I don't want to sound too cheesy here, but that's super powerful, everybody. It's just the data's there. Okay, let's put it that way. So getting back focused here, it's just it's not a good investment of time and energy if what you're doing is not working and you're just like going into the test just like hoping like, oh, let me just give it another shot, let's see what happens. Not recommended. Yeah, it causes a lot of negative feelings, can get in the way of what you should be doing in that situation, which is improving your skills and finding a new program. That's the move in that situation, not just retaking and hoping. Okay. Now again, you're welcome to do whatever you want, but I've just seen it go poorly a lot of times, and I don't want that to happen to you. Okay, rounding this out. A final time to avoid retaking might also be super obvious and maybe even repetitive. But I would like to reemphasize that if there's a more productive place to invest your time and energy, for example, expanding your accomplishments at work, expanding commitments to personal interests outside of work, polishing interview skills, developing your network, writing a better application, then retaking the GMAT might actually hurt your application because the opportunity cost. If you're studying, you're investing less time and energy into those things that might be more helpful. So yeah, do the rational analysis, handle that stuff. And then if that's handled and you're the type of person who's the personal best type of person, that would be the time to just ride that emotional wave. So let me just sum up by reiterating. The GMAT is a super important part of the process, but it's not the only part. So just do your best to weigh each part when you're choosing where to invest. That's pretty much every situation I've seen where advice about retaking or not retaking would be helpful. I really hope that it's helped you make better decisions and that it helps you make better decisions going forward. And if there's anything that you think that we might have missed here, please let us know. Just hit us up anytime at the GMAT Strategy on current social channels or contact@thegmatstrategy.com if you want to email us. As always, My greatest hope is that this material will make your studies as easy and as painless as they can possibly be. If you want more tips and strategies for optimizing your performance on the exam, please head to our website, thegmatstrategy.com, which is linked in the description of this content, and check out our free video on how you can reach your dream GMAT score in half the normal time. Put a lot of time and energy into that. I think it's really going to help you out. In the meantime, this is a regular show, so please subscribe and please stay positive and stay consistent with your studies. Talk to you all soon.